I mean, it's not like well edited, but it's sure edited. Hi, I think we're live. Um,
Okay.
Here to talk about Bridgerton and other stuff, but like huge emphasis on the Bridgerton and a lot less emphasis on the other stuff. And I will say, we were talking a bit behind the scenes about the fact that we're like low key in the middle of a violent coup attempt because domestic terrorists took over our nation's capital. So this is definitely escapism. And if escapism is not what you're looking for right now, if escapist romance is not what you're looking for, you're not going to be interested in this discussion, and you're probably not going to be interested in Bridgerton because Bridgerton is definitely escapist romance. Let me tell you, I am joined, as always, with the lovely Kate. Kate, say hi.
Hello.
And Kate mentioned that she arrived with notes. I arrived with an obscene amount of political footage under my belt from this week, a lot of existential dread, and a really badly edited thumbnail. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kate because I am dying to hear her initial thoughts on Bridgerton. I have been waiting the entire holiday. I marathoned this entire show in about one day and instantly was like, ah! So, Kate, please tell me, what would you rate Bridgerton on a scale from 1 to 5?
1 to 5,
Yes.
4.5, 5, easily. Yeah.
And tell me what gets it up to a 4.5 or potentially even 5.
I mean, it's visually stunning. The storytelling, especially considering the source material, because I've read half the series, you have not.
Right.
Um, it, I really enjoyed how much it basically was like it took the very very basic story from the book one, and it just kind of added about 8 billion other things to it that actually really added to it. There's a couple things that I could say like detracted from the original story, or I felt they almost I would have expected them to do better because of the overall change,
Mm-hmm.
which disappointed me just a little bit. But other than that, it was fantastic.
I remember you telling us about the books, the first two books, which you read at least the first two
Yes.
books, possibly even more, before you even started the series, before we any of us got a chance to watch
Yes.
Bridgerton. And you felt that the second book was better than the first, and that maybe the first two leads was not like Daphne and Simon were not examples of Julia Quinn putting her best foot forward. Like maybe she didn't, start with the best, which is fine, maybe saving the best for last.
Mhm.
You had soft spot for certain characters. Do you still feel after watching this show that Daphne and Simon are still not the best romance, but that there's better romances to come?
It it definitely improved my perspective on that romance. I wasn't against it at all. I do have some controversial opinions. I know they're your favorite opinions. Um,
They
but
are. I want to hear all your controversial
I
opinions.
okay. So I'm like I have a whole section in my notes defense of Anthony. So
Yes. Okay.
um, I I I say I have a large amount of hope and somewhat even dread of them ruining book two.
Mm-hmm.
I already
Book
have
two
fan
is
cast for
Anthony's
who I
book,
want
right?
the girl to be. Yes, it is Anthony's book.
Okay.
And I mean, so I've read the first four now, and they're very much following just the very general basic tropes. Like it's not anything new or unexpected. So the first one's obviously like the fake courtship. Oh, what's gonna happen? And the second one's very much like enemies to lovers. Third one's Cinderella. Fourth one is friends to lovers. That's kind of where we're going.
Uh huh.
Um, I think, to be honest, I really liked the dynamics of book two more than I liked of book one, and how much they improved the show for me to actually really appreciate the romance. It may not be like my OTP or whatever of the entire series.
Mm-hmm.
It's I really did enjoy the romance between Simon and Daphne. Was it
Okay.
problematic at some points? Yes.
See, let's
But we
talk
can
about
talk
that a
about
little
that.
bit. You're calling it problematic. I saw the term toxic thrown around a lot on Twitter. I saw
Hmm.
whole articles being written about the fact that, like, yes, this is a romance, but, there's just like a lot wrong here. And you, I remember, mentioned that in the first book, there is a sex scene, and we're just gonna say sex and get it right out of the gate. Like, if
Yeah.
this show has a lot of it, so we're gonna not be uncomfortable. You mentioned there's a sex scene that in the book really had a startling lack of consent, and in watching the series, it's very obvious which one that is. But I haven't read the book, and I've heard that the TV show toned down the lack of consent. So talk a little bit about that. You're when you're saying it's toxic, you mean the TV show version is as well. They didn't take that out enough.
Yes. I'd be interested in hearing how, with your like much comparatively less understanding of what it was going to happen going in, how you felt about that scene. But I do feel like, at least in the show, they toned down a lot of what was wrong with that scene. Because in the book, he was extremely drunk. It went on for much longer. There was a
Ooh.
large fight afterwards,
Okay.
and she did not seem very repentant in the book. She
Okay.
did not seem like she thought for the slightest. She almost seemed confused as to what she was doing in the book, but she didn't seem to think it was wrong.
Okay.
Um, what I did also like about how they handled it differently in the show was, in the book, it kind of had this really uneven feel about what she actually understood about sex and how children are conceived. Um, because in the beginning of the book, it's set up more like she's just friends with all the guys, and that's why she never gets any proposals, and not because she has an overprotective brother. So that
Okay.
difference added to the unease. Yeah, it definitely made it seem like she was much more knowledgeable at the beginning. Like she was kind of like make these sly jokes every once in a while, or at least didn't seem as naive as she was in the show. The show, to its credit, was very consistent on her not knowing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it still, however, it did have that non-consensual scene, and I
Right.
think, to be honest, as much as I enjoy the fact that she had that friendship with Rose, her maid, and I like that she decided to go talk to Rose about, okay, tell me the truth, tell me exactly what happens. Um, that, along with some other details, actually shot them in the foot a little bit about exactly what they were trying to do with toning down that scene.
Because she
Because
knew what she was doing.
with but she knew what she was doing. With the book, there's some level of her not fully knowing, and it's basically her testing the waters, almost like that's her justification. That was like her proving it to herself. Whereas in the show, she fully knew. So I wish they would have done it that part differently. I still almost want them to keep the rose scene, to be honest. I want them to keep the rose scene, and I want them to change how they did that, because to be honest, I think they could have had a fully consensual intimate scene, and then it end up being a very large fight. And I either a large fight, and I've also read some like internet discussion posts where it's actually talking more about how they wish that his problem was less about hating his father and more about like his fears for Daphne. But even then, I'm like, no, you still need to have it be not a non-consensual thing, and you could still get the same amount of drama, and you could actually have her still be somewhat wrong. So later she starts to make some somewhat ultimatum style demands, and that, if it had continued on for too long, that could have been construed as something almost toxic or unhealthy. Whereas because it really only lasted for so long, and it really tied into really interesting with the storyline with Marina, which
Mm-hmm.
I thought was really fascinating with the whole arc of forgiveness. Um, it didn't last long enough for it to become bad. It was more of her having to forgive him and forgive herself, and accept that there's some things that you just have to work through and talk about and not just act.
So when you're talking about the when people are talking about the toxicity, I think they're talking
Mm-hmm.
a little bit about toxicity on both sides, right? would you say?
Yes,
But when they're
I would
talking,
agree.
okay, I get that sense too. What's throwing me, and you know me, like I'm always going to be the defend the woman type, right? What's throwing me
Mhm.
is when I'm hearing about this kind of non-consensualness, or I'll throw away the kind of, just the non-consensualness of this. I
Mhm.
hear that from one side. I hear that she, in that one particular scene, forced non-consensual sexual interactions, which I agree. I saw that. But where I'm lost, I guess, is that okay, whether she knows some of what she's doing or whether she knows a lot of what she's doing or whatever, I'm not in her head. I just know she doesn't know much about sex. But I know he knows a lot, right? Like we're supposed to believe he knows what he's doing. And in, I guess, particularly in modern sexual interactions, if a guy were having sex with a girl and he was saying what they're doing will not get her pregnant, but what they're doing could get her pregnant, and he knows that and she doesn't, then that
Mhm.
feels pretty non consensual to me too. Because without getting into too many specifics, everybody consult your parents or your doctor or your health teacher. What they were doing could absolutely get her pregnant. He may have been reducing the chances or something like that. But um, no, viewers, dear readers, he was not eliminating the chance of her getting pregnant. So she was going through this, and without her consent, she could have been getting pregnant and not knowing it. Now, we as viewers know, or at least we're told, that she wants to have children. Okay, great. So, like, yes, she could get pregnant without her consent, but we can kind of infer that she would be pretty happy to get pregnant. So maybe it's okay. But it's still without her consent or knowledge. And even if she was desperate to get pregnant, if she got pregnant having, like if she thought this was essentially an immaculate conception, Virgin Mary style, that would probably be pretty distressing and startling. She could end up in a situation where, for example, we see people consume alcohol in this movie. She could have ended up in a situation where she was drinking while pregnant for a long time without knowing she was pregnant, thinking she could. So I won't get into too many, rabbit trail, whatever paths there. But I think there was a lot of non consensual stuff both ways. And I'm not saying it negates itself. I'm not saying, like this doesn't, this toxic and this toxic equals no toxic. It, romance novels have a lot of toxicity in them. That's just, so do murder mysteries. So does every other genre of book. I just don't know why she's the only one getting the flack for this when he did it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of viewed it that way. I don't think I put it in quite such terms, but part of it I think is it is more subtle. I guess you could argue it's not as much as the idea we as society have on it specifically. But I think I mean I agree with you. What he's doing, he's constantly lying. Now I could raise the argument. There's also several moments in the show where it's very clear they don't understand health. So there's parts about the corset. I sent you a video. I don't know if you got to watch it or not, but about
I did,
fashion.
about
But
the
they have
costumes. Loved
there's
it.
so I mean, obviously the showrunners themselves have misunderstandings about costuming, but also there's misunderstandings even back then about like health and things like that. Um, I don't know when they figured out that you shouldn't drink while pregnant. I don't know if
Good point.
back then they had the understanding of his method of contraceptive would have worked or not. We don't know technically if he would have known that. Uh, and even later on with the doctor telling her the tea thing, there's some mix up about that part too. So in for just discussion's sake, I would be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he didn't realize that he was wrong. But even still, whether that's true or not, I think him lying is just as bad because what he's doing, whether he knows he's wrong or not, he knows he is physically capable of getting her pregnant,
Right.
and
And
that
he
he
knows that
very
she doesn't know
clearly,
enough about it to even ask the questions.
yes,
He knows that
yes,
he's having interactions with somebody who has
and
the sexual knowledge of, like a modern day child who has not yet had like sixth or seventh grade health class.
yeah, and because of that, even though it's not, he's there's just a lot of him almost manipulating her.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't say that it's not both ways. I'm not going to say that following the events of episode 6, she does pose multiple moments where she's playing almost an ultimatum, but it's not as, I don't know. It's neither of them are acting great at all times. There is manipulation. There is no leaving out information, things that you should know is wrong. And even if you give them the benefit of the doubt on certain things, they're still doing things that are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think the show overall did a really great job of like curbing that and like taking some of the edge off of the problems that were in the book. But it's still there, and I could make the argument that, like you said, that technically they're not preventing anything. So a lot of people were, I read, were defending the scene being left in because they wanted suspense of could she be pregnant? They wanted that suspense left in the show. And if you include our thought process of, well, that's not entirely true, you could have actually had that suspense in some ways if you twisted that around. I do believe that you could have had at least 90%, maybe even more of all the plot beforehand and most of it afterwards be the same without that scene unfolding like it did, and it be more about their manipulations and not being able to talk to each other truthfully rather than her making a really big problematic error and then still not being able to talk about it.
Yeah. And
Because
I think she knows, at the very least, she knows what she's doing is not what he wants. She knows what she's doing is, um, I guess, invasive. She knows what she's doing is on some level wrong, that she's breaking his trust or pushing his
mm-hmm,
boundaries in some way. So the naivety argument to me doesn't necessarily excuse it. She just knows what she's doing is wrong. I would just say he also knows what he was doing was wrong, that he lied to her
mm-hmm,
about the nature of the situation and about what his body and her body could and could not do. So it's not that I'm surprised to see, people pointing out the dubious consent in this. I think the dubious consent is intentionally put into this. It's just I'm surprised to see it only go one direction, I guess. I don't know.
yeah,
But it's also like, I don't know. You referenced when you were going through the novels at the top of the hour, you referenced that one of the novels is like a Cinderella story, which sounds great, by the way. I'm so excited to read these books.
mm-hmm,
Stoked to get to Cinderella's story, stoked to read all of them. Very excited about the Penelope book. You're like all of them. However,
mm-hmm,
just because something, as you know, because you're reading these and because you've read a lot of books before, just because something is like a romance novel does not mean it's a Cinderella story. So that's why you're differentiating the one that is, right? And this one is not. It's not intended to be perfect. It's not intended to be, you know, two perfect, beautiful people fall in love, the end. You know what I mean? So it's not that it's not bothering me that there's conflicts that they hit along their way
mm-hmm.
and that some of the conflicts, most of the conflicts are themselves and their own misunderstanding and wrongdoing and bad actions and lying and omitting the truth and also lying and whatever. But I had figured from the trailer and the fact that this is produced by Shonda Rhimes that it was going to go that route. And I thought it was going to be way worse. Like when you told me there was like dubious consent in this, I was like, Shonda is going to take like all of the, like dead parents, dubious this, lying, whatever. She's going to take it and explode it through the roof. Like it's just, like you take the drama and multiply it times a million because I'm used to like, Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder, and I don't watch Grey's Anatomy, but I'm familiar with the lack of happy endings in it and the dubious things that come up there. And I just figured it would go that route, whereas this really did feel like, if not a perfect love story, it felt like a love story to the viewer, a love story to the reader, that we are supposed to really get the chance to actually enjoy ourselves the whole time and not be in emotional pain every second.
Yeah. Well, and I I will say, especially versus the book is very problematic, and to be honest, short. So you don't have a
Mhm.
lot of time to fall in love with those characters. I didn't really like either of them in the book. In the show, I really liked them. They both had big flaws. They both made big mistakes, and I think, to be honest, that's why people are so caught up on her big mistake, is because at this point you like her. You have a protective instinct about that character, and for her to do something wrong that you can't really defend, you're like, oh, I don't like it. But I will say the show actually does a really great job too of convincing me that they've made their mistakes, but they're now going to progress and choose to try to communicate and work through their problems and choose each other, as Violet said. And so it does instill a lot more hope, which I will say with the Shonda thing. I was like, are we sure this is a Shonda show? I know
Up
she's on
until
a
the
write now at
last
this
moment,
time, but
I was like,
are
I
we
don't
positive?
know.
Like those bees, those subtle references with the bees. I was like, what are they going to do? Are they going to have bees attack now? Like, what's going to happen?
I I didn't know what to. It was nice because it kept me on edge, which like kept me on edge all day, the entire day that I marathon the whole thing with my sister. But I did it, and now going into the other seasons, maybe I'll have a false sense of security that all of them will have a happy ending, and maybe some of them won't. I don't know, but for this one, I was just waiting for there to be like a Shonda style plot twist of like joke, like she's at, it was like it was her mother who killed his father, like that kind of, what I'm talking about. And it just didn't go that route. And I was thrilled. Like I think one of like I said, like it filled like a TV viewing hole in me that I didn't even know was there, because like I haven't watched a lot of great romances lately. I've watched a lot of, The Crown and The Queen's Gambit and like those kind of things, and I know we've kind of tried to, there's some slim pickings of almost romances in some of those, but not really any,
Mhm.
not really anything that would fill like an Oliver and Felicity style hole. You know what I mean? And this one
Yeah.
felt like they're putting their best romance foot forward, though not perfect.
Yeah. I mean, you say Elicity, and I did see all the comparisons online to being Elicity. I was like, I see what you're saying here, and I don't hate it, but I also have some issues with it because it was also saying basically like season three Elicity. I was like, well, that was like their most problematic sign, 3 and 4, but
Yeah.
that's okay. It I from all that criticism, I do have to say I did really like their story. I thought it was well done, which is why I've watched it 4 times. So we emphasis on that. I've watched it 4 times.
I've
So
already started rewatching
it
it as
all the
well.
criticism is not to say, yeah, all the criticism is to say I liked it. And I think that's why I'm so opinionated about it, is like I liked it, and they just did these two more things, it wouldn't have been perfect.
So let's talk a little bit about The side character. I was gonna say, let's talk a little bit about the non-romance elements, but thank God, even the side characters are also part of the romance elements. All I've done is win with this show. So we get to meet a lot of the side characters, which I looked up, like all the, like I think I told you this already, but apparently I did read some books in the Bridgerton series, like actually quite a few books in the Bridgerton series. They're just all the prequels. So I think I've actually read all three of the prequels. I've at least read two of the prequels, which covers whatever. I don't know. But I was like, oh, let me look up like the books in the actual Bridgerton series. Like, I just wanted to see who was next. And I think, as you said, Anthony is next. I know Penelope is book number
Yes.
4, I want to say, question mark. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it
But
goes. Yeah, it's Anthony, then Benedict, then Colin.
okay. Anthony, then Benedict, then Colin. Wait. Daphne, Anthony, Benedict,
Daphne,
Colin.
Anthony, Benedict, Colin, and then the next is Eloise, Francesca, Gregory, and Hyacinth, or Hyacinth and Gregory. I can't remember which one.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. That sounds right. Anyway, so I looked up that order, obviously immediately forgot it, but I'm wondering, do you think season 2 will immediately jump right into Anthony's story? How does it vibe with what you've already read with book 2? I know that's what you're kind of most looking forward to, and you are an Anthony Defense Squad member or leader, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm. So they're actually spaced out quite odd. So the next book does follow the exact like the next year at the start of the season.
Okay.
I would assume that each season is basically going to cover Ace, like their season out, basically. Although I will say, from what I've read a little bit ahead, Eloise's actually takes place kind of later than the season. There are some books that do overlap. So if I had to take a guess, they'll probably do mainly Antony's next season. They might do Antony's and Benedict's. I'm kind of just Antony's, but if they give me the quality of television they gave me this time, I'm fine. I just really liked Antony's story, and I really want all the focus to be on them, but that's personal.
Can we talk about
When it
spoilers?
comes
Because
to
I've read the
Penelope
description of
and
Anthony's
Colin,
book. So I already have a little bit of spoilers just by reading the description of his book. And I have a
okay,
question. Okay.
okay,
This isn't like
okay, go
spoilers
ahead.
about book contents because I haven't read it, but this is just me making
Yeah.
inferences. From what I can see, his what appears to be the love interest from the synopsis of his book is the older sister of like a friend or something like that. His love interest name is Kate, and I already know, having read some the like I said, the prequels, I already know how like mistresses are usually referenced in these books, which is very little and as a very minor plot point
Mm-hmm.
because it's come up in another one that
Mm-hmm.
I read that I guess it takes place before these. It was a prequel, not a sequel, whatever. And I was reading some article that was saying like 10 things that are different about the Bridgerton thing. And they mentioned that in Anthony's, it's different, that there was a full fledged storyline with him and his mistress, because the opera singer, because in his book, she's like a minor plot point that's barely referenced. So what do you think they're going to do with that? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think
Yes.
I'm not necessarily, and what's her name again? Serena something?
Sienna.
Sienna. I'm not
Sienna
necessarily
Russo.
Sienna
Oh,
Russo.
yeah.
Okay. I'm not necessarily an Anthony and Sienna shipper. I'm not against Anthony and Sienna. Like, it is what it is. I didn't particularly like Anthony, so I'm not necessarily out here liking the two of them together. There was nothing particularly great about her. Like, it was a nice little side character thing to kind of give us a little insight into what this world is like and the class differences within it. But I would have to assume a lot of viewers actually do like them together. So how do they then course correct into him and Kate? Do they just drop Sienna entirely, never mention it the way his book does? Or the way I assume his book does?
I don't know, and I will say that was a big problem I had with how they did. Anthony. I really liked him this even in this season. I will admit I think my affection for him was slightly colored by the fact that I had read the book, but I did not like that they had the mistress plot line, and I didn't like the how prominent of a side story it was, because a big part of his story anyway is him saying because of traumatic events in the past, he has decided that he will never love his wife, he will never fall in love, yada yada yada.
He will never
In
fall in love. Like he'll
season
marry, but
one,
he won't
he,
fall in love.
yeah,
Is that what his
he
claim
won't
is?
love her. Yeah, he won't. Yeah, he says he won't love his wife, and he doesn't want to fall in love with anybody.
Okay.
Um, and he, but in the show, you could argue that he's in love with Sienna, and
Yeah.
it's a very, it's a very toxic love. It's a very problem-filled love, but it is some way he loves her. And I
If
didn't
I
particularly
were
like that because they'll have.
asked as a viewer who had not read the book, having
Mhm.
watched season 1 of Bridgerton, if I were asked, is Anthony in love with Sienna? I would say no, but I would expect like a
Okay.
50-50 split on answers. I happen to be in the 50% that would say, no, he's not in love
Okay.
with her, and no, she's not in
Yeah.
love with him.
I would actually say, yeah, I would say that he's not truly in love with her, but
Okay.
he is infatuated with her.
Yeah.
Um, he has a obsession with her
Hmm.
because, I mean, I just have an issue with how much they focused on that, and I don't see how they're going to justify his actions in season one with some of the things he says in the book. There is like a scene with a mistress. Although nothing actually happens with the scene, it's more that scene is actually more about what happens between him and Kate in the book. But um, there is mention of a mistress. She is an opera singer. It's not named Sienna. I don't know why they changed her name, but she's not Sienna. She's somebody else. And she's in that scene, then she's gone. No more mention of her, except for mention like they do bring up that the men are more experienced than the women. They do it in the show. They
That's
do it
a
in all the books.
very
It's something
common
that's
romance trope.
accepted in. Yes. So it is something that is in the book, but it's not. It was nowhere near as prominent for Antony as it was in the show. It was more about her knowing that he was like a rake and her having an issue with that, and her basically saying, I don't understand why people say that reformed rakes make the best husbands and things like that, and her just forming a really kind of bad opinion of him at first. And it's very much like fan fiction of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Like that's
Right.
what I mean. The entire series is Jane Austen fan fiction, but
Right.
especially book two, that's what it is. And I mean that's why I like it. But um, it I don't know what they're gonna do with Sienna, and I don't love how prominent she was, and I don't think it was the best choice for his character going forward either. Especially like for what you said, not everybody that's going to watch the show has read the books. They don't understand that she's not supposed to be as prominent of a character. I liked that they included some amount of class distinction, but to be honest, there was that already with other characters. And if we're gonna go on that, Benedict is actually the one that has to kind of talk more about like class expectation and like marriageability and stuff like that.
Hmm. That's a good point. I guess I just didn't see where they were going with it if she wasn't intended to be the if she wasn't intended to be his like permanent love interest, because I know with this series people are going like you get that this is a romance novel, you get a happily ever after. If she's not going to be the happily ever after, I wasn't sure exactly what we were supposed to get out of their interaction other than showing the class distinction, showing the difficulty of romance across classes. And even then, there at the end, he was still like, oh, we could throw caution to the wind and you can be in society with me. And she chose not to because she knew how uncomfortable it would be. So it was like, it wasn't even that it was impossible or unheard of. It's just that it would have kind of made the family look cheap or ridiculous or whatever. Obviously, I disagree with this class. Like, I don't think, there should be this sort of, this kind of person can't marry this kind of person. Like, I don't believe that, but I understand that that's like the world that they're writing in. But because it's a fantasy world, they can have those endings where the parlor maid ends up with the duke and, the stable boy ends up with the princess and whatever.
Mhm.
So, and they hinted that there at the end when basically they're saying we could throw caution to the wind. And had they, like, if they were intended to be an additional happily ever after for season one, very easily they could have just had her, surprise, throw on a pretty dress, show up, and there's a few side eyes from the judgmental ones, but most of the key people love her. Everybody lives happily ever after. The end. You've seen it, I've seen it, whatever. They chose not to do that. And I just, having not read his story, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the purpose is. I can only assume that as they added a bunch to this season, they'll add a bunch to his season as well to make him realize this love was different than whatever love he does have, and, set him on a path to be a reformed Drake or whatever it is he's supposed to be. Like, I have to assume there's a purpose. I just don't see it yet.
Yeah. And I mean, when I think about it, I could argue the fact that they wanted to show what it meant for a guy to be a rake without it having to be Simon, because they don't want to have like a love triangle. And I can also see that they wanted people to get to know Benedict if the next story was going to be about him, because basically he was like a really, really side character, because if he was barely in the show and then all of a sudden he's going to be the main character next season. We've already seen him, but he
Right.
did not, like, he wasn't involved. That would be a really weird cut. So maybe they wanted to have him included a little bit more. I don't know. I like you said, they've added so much to the show that there's some amount of leeway and just faith I'm just going to give them to make it work. I am a little nervous about it because I really did like the romance he has in the books, but I guess we'll just have to see, because honestly, the amount that they added, I could never have expected. Uh, I mean, Queen Charlotte was added, Prince Friedrich, my heart was added. I don't like, because that was like a whole section. I had a whole section about like them adding all these characters and like why I like that they added Prince Friedrich, other than the fact that I had a crush on Freddie Stromo when I was a kid.
Whoever they had, yeah, I don't know which actor they had playing the prince, but he looked very fairy tale princey. Like, he looked extremely
Mm-hmm.
straight out of a Disney castle.
He was in Harry Potter,
Okay.
and he did a couple of years ago. He played H.G. Wells in a terrible, terrible ABC TV show, but it was amazing.
That sounds fun. So tell me what other new
Yeah,
characters you liked. Is the dressmaker new?
the dressmaker, if I remember correctly, was mentioned. There's plenty of characters that were mentioned in the books, and in some books played a slightly more prominent role. But for instance, Lady Denbury was a very, very side character, and they promoted her right up into top level characters. Uh, the Queen, I mean, she exists in the consciousness of the story because it is very much Regency and everything else. I could point out the fact that in 1813 she wouldn't have held court, but we're not. Well, that's fine. That's a little bit of my history buff just coming out. In They added Prince Friedrich, which threw a little bit of a swirl for me because on paper, his relationship with Daphne was better than her relationship with Simon. I'm just gonna
Thank
say it.
you.
Just
It's
accept
not
it.
okay. I agree. Low key, I was like, if Simon's gonna play, there's literally nothing wrong with this prince. Like, go off, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, it was funny because Lady Danbury was like, okay, you haven't proposed to her, and what the heck? because she doesn't know the whole deal. And she's like, she has a prince and you haven't proposed, let her go marry the prince. And I mean, from the like personal taste point of view, I could understand her hesitance of like marrying the princes and like, I don't know if I could be up to like having the role of a prince, but prince and duke are not that actually far off. So
Right.
really, either way, she'd have a whole lot more responsibility than she had beforehand and everything else. So then, if you boil it down to just the mitten, he was nice, he was dutiful, he was adoring, he about her like her power of will, but didn't like, and he wanted to protect her, but it wasn't an overwhelming feeling of protection. He didn't ever control her choices. Like I could go on and on about on paper he was the better man, better relationship, whatever, but it was completely made up for the show. So I know there was not a chance they were going to change it and go for him. So he
Right.
was just fun to have.
I mean, obviously, with promotional photos like
Yeah.
this being out, you're like, I know where this is going, but I
Yes.
usually I expect with this type of show, if
No.
there's a love triangle, the other guy or the other girl is generally like somebody who ends up being terrible, and the prince was not. So that was a refreshing little change, if nothing else. There was nobody really in this show I found that I truly hated, other than like Simon's dad or whatever, like you were supposed to. But even like with the Featheringtons, at least they were entertaining, even if they were awful. Even with the,
Yeah.
Cinderella looking chick who was like swooning at the prince's feet. I was like, okay, like get yours, do what you want, I did not there was one character
Yeah.
I really did like, but I really hated everything they did with her storyline. Can you guess who it was?
Was it Penelope or Eloise?
Neither one.
Really?
I
Oh,
liked
so Marina.
Yes. I really loved her. When they introduced her, I was like, love her. I love her look. I love her personality. I love everything about it. I loved her friendship with Penelope. I loved the fact that all the men were falling in love with her, like everything about it. But literally everything they did with her storyline after that, I was horrified. I would like when she was introduced, I was ready for her to be like my main girl. You know what I mean? Like the one where I'm like, I'm watching this show
Yes.
specifically for Miss Maria, like the whole thing. First off, like, want to talk about
Yeah.
consent issues? Her going after, like, I know that
I
Colin
was
looks
about to
older because,
say.
like, yes. Like I know Colin looks older because this is like the type of show where they're casting like 30-year-olds to play teenagers or whatever, but correct me if I'm wrong. You've read the book. Isn't he supposed
He's
to
like
be like
22.
yeah, or younger?
He's
Cuz
like
isn't he almost
22
supposed to be like a
maybe.
little brother to Daphne and Daphne's like 21?
So no, he is older than Daphne, but just barely, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
The oldest Anthony is 28, so he can't be older than like 25.
Okay. Got lipstick smearing all over oh, that's right, because they're in alphabetical order. That makes sense. See, okay,
Yes.
whatever the case may be, he's young, he's not knowledgeable, he's very naive, whatever. And she's supposed to come across I think she's supposed to be Anthony's age or something. So she's at least 5 years older than him. She's trying to seduce him, a borderline child, in the same way that Daphne, we refer to her as a borderline child, right? So that he can
Mhm.
do what he believes to be wrong and then end up with another guy's child thinking it's his child. Like there was just so much about that where I'm like, I went into this wanting to root for this girl, and I don't know how you can call anybody else a villain after what they had her do. And I
Yeah.
was mad about it because I wanted her to be good. Like the whole time, even though she's
Uh,
doing terrible
well,
things, I'm like, why are you having my precious angel do these things? Because she's like awful.
yeah. Well, and I mean, you start off and like Lady. I think Lady Featherington isn't like outwardly evil, but like she does some things you're like, oh, like calm down, lady. You're really mean to your kids. Like you're not like a lovely person to be around. But even when she was saying these things at the very beginning to Marina, you're like, okay, totally back, technically right. However, you're being kind of mean about it.
Right.
Back off.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly Marina just becomes more and more manipulative. And then it kind of forces Penelope to be manipulative back just to protect Colin. And the whole thing, that whole sideline story was insane. I mean, because
Enraging.
there was a level that yeah, like there was still, even like the entire time, there was still a level of me that felt bad for Marina, which I was like, that's perfect villainy, is for me to still feel bad for her, even though I'm like, she is doing some terrible things. Because, and especially then when Colin tells her, like, if you had told me, I would have married you on the spot,
Mm-hmm.
just proves that Colin is like a lovable being that just
Yes.
I just want everything in the world for him. He's lovely and he did not deserve that.
I think also because, like, okay, for me, I'm not here to be like defender of men anyways. However, Colin is very good and he's very young and he's very kind. So he has that, like it's almost like me being protective of a child rather than a man. However, Penelope, who I think we are supposed to see as like 17 or something like that, like very young. Like this is her first season out. And she says like she's so young, she could technically skip a season. So I guess she's 16 then. Penelope has like big feelings for Colin already. And Marina knows it. And for her to go off on this whole, this is unrequited, blah, blah, like Marina, we're supposed to believe her to be, like I said, like probably around Anthony's age. So probably, 27, 28, 29, something like that. For a late 20s woman to be poaching the crush of a 16-year-old girl in an extremely manipulative situation wherein she's pregnant and what she really needs is the
And
guy's money.
especially to highlight the fact that the 17-year-old girl is the only girl that has been nice to her consistently through the entire show.
Right.
Penelope was the only one that was ever nice to her, and you had to go and do that.
Right. Like you've taken a guy who's younger than you, who is like good and nice and whatever, who is the crush of a 16-year-old child, essentially, who has such a soft spot for you, and you're a whole adult trying to do like it just was so terrible. And I wanted to like her so bad. But my God, like, whatever, like, you're with the Featheringtons, so they're being assholes to you, whatever. I don't really care. The whole thing with, like, Mama Featherington is very much the same trope you see with, like, the Bennett mother and like whatever else of just like any mother who's desperately trying to get their children married off in this society. And frankly, I think that they get a bad rap, and I don't like the way they're often portrayed because they're generally portrayed to be like bitches and assholes and harpy, sort of whatever, like everything Simon was saying this whole
Which is
time.
why I love Violet.
Right. Simon the whole time was like, oh, I need to get away from the mamas who are trying to what I you live in a society where they're forced to do that to literally survive. They are forced to marry their children off because they have no money or property of their own, and if they don't do this, their sons will be fine. If they don't do this, their sons will be fine. Their daughters will not be able to survive in society, and they likewise won't be able to survive in society unless some male relative, son, husband, whatever, takes pity on them. So I have a really hard time dragging a woman for being like that, as much as I don't like Miss Featherington as a person, Mama Featherington as a person, and acknowledge she was like terrible, whatever. She is like consistently trying to save their lives. And their dad's certainly not doing them any favors. So I do not mind that he
Yes.
dies.
Yeah. Well, and What was also interesting is Marina is not in the first book. She's not in the first four books. She is a minor character that I think dies before the fifth book even starts.
Oh, wow.
Uh, the whole so the guy she does end up going away with Sir Philip, uh, is the guy that later, spoiler alert, Sir Philip later marries Eloise.
Okay.
That's how she ties into this whole story. That character from far later in the series, I guess because they did want to fill out the story. And I mean, it was a fantastic storyline to add. It was fully complex and problematic. And I will say that its inclusion and its parallels between Daphne's forgiveness storyline was, I really liked that because Daphne, for most of the series, had no interaction with Marina.
Right.
So really, her first interaction with Marina was that she had done something really terrible to her brother,
Mm-hmm.
and Daphne, I you could argue that it was almost uncharacteristic for her to do this for Colin, but she does it where she wants to see him happy. She wants to hear the reasons as to why Marina did this. And in the first interaction, she hears of these terrible actions that a woman does for reasons that she felt almost sort of kind of justified means. And it was interesting too because she saw that that didn't really truly work out for Marina throughout that small storyline of her forgiving Marina. It kind of showed her she needed to forgive herself and forgive Simon because seeing what happens to Sir George and how the actions, while she could understand where Marina was coming from, did not eventually justify the means,
Mm-hmm.
did kind of propel Daphne into wanting to change, wanting to do something better, and then for Violet to finally like hit the nail just home to her about having to choose that and having to make the choice to do the best that they possibly could, and not just kind of have that expectation of it just being handed to her.
Sorry, my cat is loudly chasing an aluminum foil ball in the background, but I'm trying to silently nod to your points so as not to make noise. Um, yeah, I knew that there would be complex characters in this, and again, there's no character I truly dislike, despite their bad choices, including Marina, including Featheringtons, including like any of that. I guess if I really started to think a bit about it, I would start to make exceptions for like I don't like Mr. Featherington. I don't like the weird pedophile guy who is trying to get Daphne in the beginning. Like there's several characters
He's
that
in like
are
all of the books.
say what now?
Burbrook, he's like in all of the books. He never leaves.
Really? God, that sounds
Yeah,
terrible.
yeah.
Well, I have that to look forward to when I start reading them. I'm very excited. I know it won't be the immediate, or I assume it won't be the immediate next story, but I'm very excited about. Oh, there's not them. Do I have a Colin and Penelope picture? No, I do not. This was my Marina and Colin picture that I had saved just so I could go on my little salty rant about how much they destroyed the character that I really wanted to like. It's fine though, not bitter at all. I'm very excited about these two. I'll put them back. And both of their love stories, but Colin and Penelope. I'm excited to see where they go with that. I think that'll be really fun. Um, Other things I watched this week in 5 minutes or less. Do you feel like I can do that? Do you feel like we can get through that?
Yeah, I think you can do it.
Okay. So, other things I watched this week. Most notably, I watched Wonder Woman 1984. Um, It came out like on Christmas, I want to say, after like 4 bajillion delays. And I actually didn't watch it until this week because busy with holidays and stuff. And I just want to say, you know how something can be like not homophobic but feels homophobic? Or not biphobic but feels biphobic? Something that's not biphobic but feels biphobic is the fact that Wonder Woman and Cheetah were not girlfriends. And I feel like they literally had this scene where, and this is very early in the movie, so this is not necessarily spoilers. I mean, like everything I'm saying is kind of spoilers, but whatever. They had this scene where she's sitting across from her early in the movie. It's at this lovely diner. They've got glasses of wine. There's this beautiful view of the city, and it cuts to the scene, and Wonder Woman is like, "You're so funny," and it's just like it literally sounded like the cliche, like "I love talking to you. You're so fun," like flirting on a date type of thing. To this who is played by Kristen Wiig, so like yes, she is so funny. It's true, and I'm like, oh, they're girlfriends. Like they're on a date. Like they're, and they weren't, and instead she ends up like with a dead guy for most of the movie, and I just feel like it's like I can't put my finger on how that's biphobic, but I feel like it's biphobic. But the rest of the movie was great. I just like did not like any of the romance in it, and I'm like a one-trick pony, so that's what I'm gonna hone in on first. But like Wonder Woman was great. The plot line was cool. It was like extremely on the nose, like like sometimes we talk about Supergirl being like really on the nose when it comes to like political issues or whatever. This one went like full force on the like we're gonna be super on the nose when we're talking about political issues, but it was fine. Like I agreed with it, so it was fine. But the romance should have been between Wonder Woman and Cheetah, and with like a couple scene rewrites, it would have been. And now, anytime I hear, I hope you know what audio I'm talking about. Like it's used like on a bunch of like TikToks and stuff where there's that girl that's being like, I love talking to you. You're so funny. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll send it afterwards. That literally is like basically exactly what Wonder Woman says in a scene with Cheetah, and yet does not date her. And I just feel that we need to reconsider that. Another thing I watched this week was the first couple episodes of the second half of the final season of Sabrina, because the second half of the final season came out on New Year's Eve, I want to say, or New Year's Day, whichever. So have not finished that, but I will save my entire review of that for next week. We will discuss that, particularly because it is the series finale and it's technically DC ? And the last thing I watched this week was the first episode of the season The Bachelor. Please tell me you watched it too. Please, I'm asking so nicely.
No.
Kate, listen. I will tell you why you should watch it, okay? I've watched the show a good few times. And whenever they start the first episode, they almost always start it by either showing like the Bachelor or Bachelorette or just like a whole bunch of like screaming guys or girls or whatever ready to meet them. And for the first time that I've ever watched it, it shows the entire episode opens on a cold open of him meeting one of the girls, and her name is Kate. Like the whole episode is just a cold open of her walking out of the car with something hidden behind her back. Watch the episode, you're gonna love it.
Oh, okay.
It's so great. I tried to pick out my top 4 who I thought would make it, because we started with like 32 women and like I think 5 got eliminated the first night. So I picked out 4 that I'm like, these are the ones who I think will make the final. And 3 of the 4 got immediately cut. So I almost unnervingly was wrong. Like it would have been hard. Like if I was trying to predict which ones were going to get cut, that's harder than predicting like what, which 27 or whatever would continue. And I almost perfectly predicted who would get cut on accident. So his taste is not my taste.
I will say I did see the kind of retweets about that one contestant that somebody was saying she followed me home and like watched me, and like I saw that you're like, okay, she can win. Did she get cut?
No, she stayed. She was the only one of my four who stayed. I picked, she was great. They didn't show a ton of her, honestly, but what they did show was like exactly what I hoped she would be. She was hot, she was fun, she was smart, she was nurturing, all that. But the three that got cut that I thought would stay, one of them is like a ballerina in New York City, like a professional ballerina in New York City for like the Harlem Ballet, whatever up there. Beautiful. Her name was Alicia. She got cut. They showed almost like they had like this whole little intro for her, like filmed at like the ballet studio and stuff. Where I'm like, okay, surely she's staying because they're like trying to give her a bunch of screen time, but he didn't keep her. So I don't know what that's all about. The other one that got cut, her name was Cassandra Santiago, I want to say. She was a social worker and he works with kids in a social program. So I'm like, okay, they're going to have similar values. And she also just like had wifey face. I don't know how to explain like what that means, but she had like wifey face. They almost did not show her at all. So I was just totally wrong there. And then the other one, they gave her quite a lot of screen time. She was like, she's an IT consultant. She's very smart. She's also very, very hot. Like she's that perfect, like smart, hot mix. And like was something at her university for like leadership service and whatever. I don't know. So like she seems like the type who'd be like, if you want a power couple, she'd be a good power couple. And her name was Senna, something like that. And they showed her because she had like a little jokey thing when she got out of the limo and stuff. And then he cut her because he has bad taste, apparently. But it's fine because there's a whole bunch of other good ones still to come. There was one that, like, and I won't spoil it by saying who it was, but there was one contestant in particular, whenever I was like harassing people in real life and being like, hey, go through all the contestants with me and pick out your top four, which I did to like both of my sisters. And just like, I don't know. I like to force people to do things like that. Every time we'd go past one contestant in particular, I would always say, I know this person is a plant to cause drama. She will make it a couple weeks and be immediately cut, if that. Like, they will not vibe. I know exactly what she's on there for. She is there to cause some kind of, I'll just say it, political conflict. I was wrong. She and The Bachelor vibed. Like, they had good chemistry. I'm eating my words. Once you watch the episode, I will tell you who it is if you haven't already figured it out. It's 9:02. Okay. I should cut us off.
Okay.
Okay. Same time, same place next week. I'll also be discussing Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, This Is Us, a bunch of other shows are returning or have returned. Actually, for both of those two, I already watched the season premiere. We just had way too stacked of an episode tonight to get through all of those, but we'll go through all of the shows next week that are returning and go into The Bachelor in a little more detail, because by then Kate will have caught up on the first two episodes and will have strong opinions about what women should be advancing. Right, Kate?
Sure.
Right. Definitely. Awesome. Okay. I will talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.